Elegantly framed. You are. Ja, sig velkommen til den sidste debat i vores telt i dag, som er en debat med en kvinde, som jeg har beundret i lang tid. I'm going to use English because I'm saying nice things about it. So I've been in great admiration of this woman sitting next to me for a long time. Her name is Stella O'Malley, and she is the founder and executive director of Genspect. And in a moment you will explain what Genspect is all about, what's why you joined the fight against child sex change and other of these skirmishes and horrible things that have ensued from gender ideology. So really happy that you made it all the way from Ireland and here. Have you enjoyed the Folkemøde in Denmark so far?
I love it. This is amazing. This whole event is amazing.
Do you have anything comparable in Ireland?
No, nothing at all.
So are you going to do that? Because I know you have nothing to do at all. So might you just replicate this in Ireland as well?
Yeah. Maybe next year, yeah. I'll let you help.
That's good. All right, so yeah, let's kick it off. Here you are. Talk to us a bit about your background and what Genspect does and why you joined this fight. All right, here you are.
So when I was a kid, I had what would now be called gender dysphoria, and it lasted many years. And it was fine as a young kid when I was 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. It didn't really matter. But then as I got older, it certainly got a bit dark. I went through puberty and it was pretty awful. So I can see why all these gender kids who do have issues, why they get distressed. But ultimately, by going through puberty, you have a sexual awakening. And when you have a sexual awakening, it moves you from thinking only of yourself to falling in love, thinking of other people, thinking of how you fit in society. And that sexual awakening was the liberation for me to become comfortable in my own skin. Because, for example, me falling in love and somebody falling in love with me, they liked my body, they liked who I was. And so that changes your relationship with your body. Love is feeling, as they say. But many, many years later, I became a psychotherapist. And I wasn't involved in gender, but whenever I met anybody who was transsexual at the time, that's what it would have been called, I would think, oh, they got stuck. I kind of had that. I remember feeling like I would have wanted to be trans, and they got stuck. Just like, imagine if you'd had OCD as a kid and you moved out of it, and you met people with OCD when you're older. It's kind of a sympathy and it's kind of interest, but also a genuine kind of feeling of relief maybe that I didn't go that direction. And I didn't really get involved in gender issues until I noticed the kind of growing kind of strange stories in the newspapers that were kind of talking about things like trans kids. Whenever they said trans kids, I'd go, well, where am I in that? Because I'm a kid who was very transy, for want of a better phrase, and then I grew beyond it because I wasn't offered beauty blockers. I wasn't offered the option of medicalisation. And I wrote an article for the Sunday newspapers in Ireland, and as a result I ended up being invited to do a film for Channel 4 in the UK. And so that film, that was in 2018, and it was a baptism of fire, because I never experienced such censorship in my life. I never experienced such strange, savage tactics of trying to suppress debate. I never experienced something that was so pretty, what would you call it, dishonest. A dishonest kind of campaign was ran against me. Now, I had never written about trans issues. I'd never said anything about trans issues. I had written one article which was about me as a child. So they had nothing to go on, and that's why they chose me, because they knew I was a psychotherapist, they knew I'd written books about mental health, about parenting, about teenage years, and they also knew that I had done nothing about trans because I hadn't been involved in this issue.
And just to make clear, this was a documentary on Channel 4, right?
Yeah,
so.
And the premise of that, thank you very much, it's called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. And the premise of the film was, of the 4,000% of females who are seeking medical transition, could any of those females be like me? Could any of them actually end up growing comfortable in their own skin and moving on without medically transitioning? And the question was deemed to be transphobic, and I was like, well, how could it be transphobic insofar as we're only asking could any of them be like me? And 4,000% rise.
You're talking about this very sudden rise in the number of girls identifying as boys.
Yeah. So in that year, I suddenly started to immerse myself in this issue, and I then found out that what I had experienced as a child is now and would now be called classic childhood onset gender dysphoria. That I had all the criteria of a diagnosis that's well known. Now, I came from a fairly typical Irish family. Nobody was bringing me to a psychiatrist when I was 6 to get me diagnosed. It wasn't in the world in Dublin back then. But it's classic childhood onset gender dysphoria. Generally presents around 3, 4, 5, or 6. Usually boys, sometimes girls, and generally they grow up to be gay, homosexual, gay, bisexual, or lesbian. Usually, not always, and I'm kind of an exception because I was a girl and I was heterosexual. But a new cohort has arrived, and I didn't know this new cohort had arrived. I just knew there was a lot of talk about trans in the world. And suddenly I started studying it, and I found out that never before had there been teenagers seeking medical transition. They weren't in the medical literature. There was no information, there was no research about them. There was literally, they were vanishingly rare. Already it's a tiny minority who are seeking to be a boy or a girl when they're 4, and they were kind of non-existent as a teenager. And this was the rise that Jesper's talking about. Suddenly, out of nowhere, very much coinciding with the arrival of social media, and very much coinciding with identity politics and social justice movements, there was this huge, and it's a phenomenon, I'm speaking actual statistics when I say a 4,000% rise in female teenagers seeking medical transition, and they were being offered a kind of pathway that was, in my view, very inappropriate, which is, first of all, you'd get your puberty blocked. So that means your sexual awakening wouldn't happen because your puberty would be blocked. So there'd be no feeling of sexual feelings, there'd be no falling in love, there'd be no crushes. Your breasts wouldn't grow, you wouldn't get body hair, so you'd remain in limbo for your teenage years, while all the other people in your vicinity, they develop slowly, some fast, others, they fall in love, all the crushes, none of that is available for somebody who has their puberty blocked. And then at the age of 16 or 18, depending on the region, you go on to cross-sex hormones and then surgery. When I realized that this was happening, I was like, well, this is profoundly inappropriate, because you need a sexual awakening to know who you are in the world. Fundamentally, we need it as humans. So I knew it was kind of cutting people off before they'd even started as a human. And so I tried to, after the film came out in November 2018, and it got a lot of, some people said it was great, some people said it was transphobic, some people said it was not transphobic, that it was very kind and compassionate. And certainly, like everybody, all sides had criticism. You know what I mean? Because you know that phrase, if you're annoying everybody, you're probably doing something right. Well, yeah, we definitely annoyed everybody. And we interviewed lots of different people for the film. It was very serious, and we interviewed the first ever detransitioner on mainstream TV in the film. And after that, I thought I'd go back to being a psychotherapist, writing my books on children, and I released a book a few months later on anxiety. And I thought I was going back to that world, but it didn't happen because I didn't expect to be deluged by emails every day of people saying that they medically transitioned 10 years ago and they didn't know what to do, of parents who were saying their child is seeking medical transition, of wives of men who had transitioned. I didn't expect to just be overwhelmed by people seeking to talk to me. And so at the start, I just kept on batting them off. And then a few detransitioners came and I gave them therapy. And then I kind of got slowly and surely kind of sucked into it. And by the time kind of COVID came around, it might take too long.
No, it's good.
By the time COVID came along, so now we're in 2020. At this stage, my email was a disaster. It was just, I'd open email like, it was like a form of torture because it would just be so every single day. Like, I shouldn't laugh, harrowing stories of devastation. And I just thought I'd write to you, and I'm like, oh God, because I didn't know what to do with all these people. And there was no physical way I could give them all therapy. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds. And so I realized we need to organize ourselves as a movement, that these people are not being looked after. There's a huge amount of people who are emailing me who are what I call lost in transition. As in they'd medically transitioned, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, but they were kind of going, I don't know what it was all for. I've got an awful lot of medical complications. I'm not really sure what I bought into here. What do you think? I don't know. So I started studying it, and I'm doing a PhD in it now. So I kind of yielded to it around about COVID. I kind of thought, oh my God, this is just a wave that is not going away. And so parents had come up to me a few months before COVID and said, is there any chance you do some parents groups? Because we're devastated, we're lost, our kids want to transition and we want to slow them down, and they're getting, online hormones over, in the post. And I said, yeah, but I'm too busy. I kept on batting them off, and then COVID came, and suddenly all my kind of cancellations came because of COVID. So suddenly I was free, and I said, oh yeah, I'll do one of those parent meetings. And the first night I did one of those parent meetings, I don't think I'll ever forget it.
Was it like a Zoom thing?
It was a Zoom, and it was the end of March in 2020. And I just, do you ever just, you look under a rock and you think, oh my God, what is this? That's what it was like. It was just these devastated parents with children who had autism, anorexia, self-harming, ADHD. These were really vulnerable children. And they kept on telling the same story, like that they were just gender conforming kids. These were ordinary girly girls, boyish boys that had no interest in gender until they were bullied or until they had some sort of trauma, and they went online and they went very quiet. They were up in their bedrooms, and maybe 6 months later they said, I'm really a boy or I'm really a girl. And these were really vulnerable kids. Not one of them didn't have another significant mental health challenge. And I was like, is this really kind of happening? I knew it was happening, but I didn't realize it was happening in the numbers.
Can I ask you a question about that? I suppose boys and girls have felt like this, like all through time.
Yes.
What changed around the time, like 2012 in this country, 2015, all of a sudden there was a different way, there was established a different way of dealing with it?
So now I've studied it, I can answer this. So back all through the ages, there have been girly boys and there have been boyish girls. Very often they'd end up being gay, like I said, homosexual or bisexual or lesbian. And it never exploded in numbers, if you follow me. It was a consistent, static kind of number of any population that would end up, which we know now. You know what I mean? Once kind of gay became accepted, we didn't suddenly get a huge influx. It didn't get a big, huge rise. It's been a kind of fairly steady number. What happened with the teenage population in the kind of 2010s is an extraordinary perfect storm of events. Like, for example, identity politics came to the fore. And so having a diagnosis was certainly a form of power. Diagnosis creep happened in the mental health industry. The mental health industry in itself became very diagnosis oriented. There's been a huge explosion around autism, and there's something about the autistic brain that makes you more likely to be gender non-conforming, because you don't do silly rules when you're autistic. So if I want to wear this, I'll wear this. But also you kind of got black and white thinking. So if I don't feel like a girl, I must be a boy. And so it very much suits the autistic mindset. So there's been a huge kind of unexplained rise in autistic diagnosis. And there's also the internet, social media, and a massive emphasis on queer theory, on gender identity theory, in the online world, and there's a huge kind of lonely population of lost teenagers who are looking for some sort of acceptance, some sort of sense of belonging, and they're being told, this is you. You know what I mean? There's almost nothing more alluring in life than being told, you know, you're lost, you hate your body, you hate yourself, and you're told you could be a different person with a different body and a different identity and a different name. And nobody will be able to refer to your old name, your dead name. Nobody will be able to refer to that because that's dead name. So you can put aside that and start all over again. It's kind of cerebrally very interesting to think I could be somebody new.
Yeah, and why do you think, why is it that the medical establishment and your NHS sort of jumped on that bandwagon? Like, how come they all of a sudden sort of take that ideology to heart, in a sense, and create an entire treatment program sort of centered around that? A treatment program which, of course, now has become to be completely unfounded, untested, and medically and ethically unsound is what more people. But why this started?
I know. There's a few different reasons. We not know. There's no clear reason. As with everything in life, there's maybe 12 different reasons. One of them would be quite important to point out is that we the mental health industry, we've never really confronted why do some people want to be a girl and why do some people want to be a boy. It wasn't confronted because the numbers were tiny. So we just kind of accepted that there was a very kind of odd, very small population of people who seemed to want it, and very few of them got it. And when they got it, they were kind of fringe levels of society. And the mental health industry they thought it was a psychiatric illness. There was no doubt about that. But like a few psychiatric illnesses, you kind of, if there's a campaign, it's quite easy to kind of move it into, oh, it's just the distress about your identity. So that could be one reason that the medical and the mental health industry never actually confronted what is going on when somebody wants to be the opposite sex. As well as that, there's been a few theories that were kind of rising up. Queer theory was rising up since the 90s, and that was a kind of theory that you could be whoever you wanted. Your subjective sense of self is superior to anybody else's understanding of you. So that means no matter how much, if you think you're Superman, because queer theory gives you that kind of power to be who you are. Your subjective experience is everything. And at the same time, there was the LGBT kind of community. It was well funded. When the AIDS crisis happened, you know, at the start they weren't very well funded, but by the 90s they were quite well funded. But when organisations get funding, they very understandably keep their funding. And after the AIDS crisis kind of calmed down, they were trying to keep their funding, and in came the kind of trans, which is part of the T, which I now kind of know that was kind of, it was put onto as a very definite decision. And so that was a place to put the funding, to put the work. They had no more to do with the gay rights. An awful lot had been done with lesbian and gay rights by the 2000s. And so there was a purpose for the funding and for the kind of organisations. And they kind of zoned in on trans at the very same time as social media was exploding the sense of victim politics, identity politics.
But how come were there any discussions in the medical field about how to best deal with this? This is what we found that in Denmark. Our medical advisor is a young psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, and he's basically found is that in my society, in my field, which is child psychiatry, there's been virtually no discussion at all, none at all, because people are very reticent, fearful, is this reading of it, and it was the same in Ireland and in Britain.
Yeah. From what everybody's accounts, obviously I'm quite friends with an awful lot of people who, for example, worked at the Tavistock, which was the largest paediatric medical physician, child sex change.
Can you briefly tell what happened to them?
Yeah, so the Tavistock started in 1989 because of one guy who had this mission to create a gender identity clinic. There was no need for it. The numbers were tiny. And as somebody said, they were effectively operating out of a broom cupboard because it was so small. But when people are interested in trans issues, they're generally very, very interested in it. Again, the autistic mindset might be coming into play. He started up this without any demand, and it just did nothing. It was just tiny numbers. The odd, for example, very homophobic parents would bring their child, their girly boy, to the gender identity clinic and say, sort him out, please.
Make
Yeah.
ungay him.
Yeah, he's embarrassing us. So that's the type of kid who was being brought in the 90s to the gender identity
And
clinic.
the way they would fix a gay boy was to turn him into a girl, in their reasoning.
Back then, no. Back then, you know, they'd kind of try and deal with them. They had this idea.
Or like conversion therapy in a sense. Is
Yeah.
that like sort of yank it out of them somewhere?
Some of them were homophobic. Some of the clinicians were homophobic back then, saying, "Oh yeah, you're right, I'll fix this boy." Some of them weren't. You know what I mean? Like it was a variety. The thing is, nobody ever kind of examined because the numbers were so small and it was so fringe. So just imagine this fringe little department that nobody's very interested in. And key point, it makes people uncomfortable. It's very noticeable. I think it's a reflection very well on you all today. Usually men just don't want to hear about it, and I truly think that's to do with castration anxiety. They just go, stop talking, do anything but just stop talking about it because you're freaking me out. Well,
Which is part of what happens medically,
Yeah,
surgically, in some instances when they complete the treatment, right?
yeah.
There's a castration.
Oh, there is castration, yeah. But I think a lot of men don't want to talk about it. I think a lot of clinicians didn't really understand it and found it too strange for them. I remember a psychotherapist who was a very good friend of mine, and I was telling her about it, and she goes, "Oh, Stella, too weird for me." And so I don't think we should underestimate people just thinking, this is just strange, I don't understand it, I don't really want to get involved in it, and I'm moving away. And so an awful lot of clinicians just didn't get involved. Strange department down the road, and there's tiny numbers, I'm not going to get involved. And then the numbers started growing. They started going, it was very, very noticeable. Around about 2014 is usually the number that most people know.
Same here,
Yeah, and it just shot up, and there were suddenly females. They were completely gender conforming as kids. These were girly little girls, massive levels of autism, ADHD, anorexia, self-harm, and they suddenly said, "I'm a boy, and it's my identity." And when you realise you're reading the same story, the same child, and like I say, those parents that came in that first night, as a result, and that's why I formed GenSpect, was because I realised we need to organise. This is a huge, I realised there was thousands of parents in underground networks who were all looking after each other. And I was like, what the hell is actually going on here? This is extraordinary. Now it's a few years later, it's probably not such news to you, but at the time it felt like something extraordinarily strange was happening, which it is.
I think in our work, because obviously we've dealt with detritious and I regularly talk to kids who've been through this and regretted it, which is obviously very difficult conversations to have. But I would say like equally difficult conversations with parents who are in a puddle on the floor at the expectation that their child will have to go through this, and they get autonomy by the age of 15 in this country. So what that basically means is that if the sexology clinic, this is our Tavistock, deem it right and proper that they should be that puberty should be halted with puberty blockers, and then subsequently they should go at 15. They could go on cross-sex hormones. This is what sort of changes their appearance from the one sex to the other. It is the semblance of the other sex. The parents have no say in the matter at that time. So I would say there are two great misfortunes in the world for parents. One is obviously losing that battle, like your child, against your wishes and against the best knowledge you have. Is this thing that my child is claiming afflicts him or her is not the issue, and then losing that fight, and that child goes on to medically change, or after your child having had this sex change and going all the way through it, all the implications, all the irreversibility that is inherent in that, realizing that you aided and abetted your child's horrendously wrong choice, and that you were actually part of this. And of course, you have met parents in both camps.
Yeah. I've met parents who've affirmed their child all the way, and then the child regrets it. And I've met parents who fought all the way, but the child still medically transitioned, and then the child regrets it. And the pain the pain is devastating. It's indescribable, but it's very, very important to know that, like, why I, for example, don't think medical transition is a good choice for a child to make. It's because the heavy medical burden on the body. When you have a sex change, when you medically transition, you lose your sexual functioning, you lose your fertility, you get a lot of complications, such as kind of urinary incontinence and heart, issues, and an awful lot of osteoporosis among the girls. Like, I'm very much pain and orgasm. So testosterone feels like a wonder drug for girls at the beginning. It really does, by the way. And they get a very high libido, get loads of energy, and they're very decisive, and they're ready to argue with everybody. It's kind of funny.
The estrogen just makes all the boys cry.
Cry a lot. I'm much more. Yes. I'm much more respectful of hormones since I've learned so much from detransitioners, and they give the truth. Because people who are medically transitioned, there's a lot of buy-in at this stage, so they're kind of really kind of saying, no, it's fine. I do get a bit of pain in my bones, and I do get pain on intercourse, but it's fine, really. While detransitioners are like, oh my God. So many detransitioners actually come to detransition mostly because of health complications. It's generally because of the health complications that arise because of medical transition is why they stop. And then they often come to the idea of, well, actually, all of that was a charade. I was trying to be a woman when I was really a man, and what was I doing? I was just, as one man said, it was just a kind of bricolage. I was just putting, a kind of an outfit on my outside, but it never really changed me inside. And so the medical transition can be very heavy on these detransitioners. So since then, we started GenSpec as a result, trying to organise and give support to these people. And what we do is we advocate for a non-medicalised approach to gender dysphoria. Our point would be, like, why can't boys wear dresses, or why can't girls be as boyish as they want to be? Nobody needs to medicalise the identities. You can just be as you are. And we do give a lot of support to detransitioners. And for example, every week I'd meet different groups of detransitioners, giving them therapeutic support, because I am a psychotherapist. And, their devastation, they live very lonely lives, very online, in their rooms. They don't go out much because the girls look like males. They have beards, they have masculine faces, and their voices are male. So when I have my detrans groups, everybody's voice is male except mine. So when they come in, I never ask them whether they're a male or female, but you would not know. You would not have a notion. Everybody has a male voice. And some of them look really feminine, some of them look really masculine, and then we proceed and we continue, you know what I mean? But like, they live a life of a no man's land where strangers all kind of think that they're the opposite sex. Their ability to have relationships and fall in love is pretty limited. They've really, really got a very hard, lonely life. And most of them feel profoundly angry with the clinicians who medically transition them. And so they're starting to sue them and things like that.
Yes. That seems to be the way things are going up in schools. So law school is one thing. Money will, if they finally get some, will make life easy in some ways, but of course they are unable to give birth to children, because these are mainly women and are sterile. Who pushes this? Like, why? How can this happen? In the sense that, why is it that there seems to be a really concerted effort to not only originally establish this treatment for children with some gender incongruence and some doubt about the sex? Why, with what we know now, with the Tavistock Clinic having been closed down and this treatment being pulled back in so many countries, why is there still like this lobby of people, and who are they that want to continue this and are really, really set on doing that?
It's the $1 million question, why is this happening? And when people have studied it, and I have studied this to the nth degree, as far as I can see, there are some very definitely some trans people who are very, very wealthy, who are seeking medical transition and who encourage other people to be, because it makes sense. If I'm trans, it'd be easier, life would be easier if more and more people were medically transitioning. There does seem to be, queer theory is kind of, for example, one of the movements that is trying to dismantle society as we know it. And this is very dismantling of society. People don't really quite appreciate how anti-parent this movement is and how anti-family this movement is. And when you realise that, then you realise, well, hang on a second, this is ousting the parents. There's a concept called the glitter family, and they tell the kids, you know, come to your glitter family. Your parents are transphobic. Come to us, we'll look after you. And these are lonely kids, and they think it's edgy and cool.
And this happens online a lot. This is why they sort of run into this thing and do the which is kind of they do some vortex that sort of draws them in.
Yeah. It's very hard to know exactly what's going down. I think in a few years we will know. But at the moment, there's definitely a huge amount of, like, I'm sure the medical, and I've really studied the whole pharmaceutical companies. And I think they're just sitting back thinking, great, because every single time somebody transitions, that is huge money for life per person. So there's an awful lot of good reason for any of the pharmaceutical companies to just allow it happen.
Because they have to take the hormones for the rest of their lives.
Medical bleach for the rest of their lives, you know. That's one thing that's sad for the detransitioners, one of the many things, is that sometimes they'll have had a hysterectomy or they'll have had, you know, their testes removed, and so they're not producing hormones themselves, and we need hormones to live. And so they still have to take synthetic hormones. And so, you know, one guy I know, and he wanted to travel down the Amazon with his friends, but he couldn't because he needs to always be near a chemist because he always has to have his medication. And it was like, wow, and he's a detransitioner for life, and he's stuck with it. But we don't know. Have you got theories of where it's all going?
Well, I do think that I think most medical doctors go into the field because they want to do good.
Yeah.
And I think there are fields, expertise, where you all of a sudden think that this thing I used to endocrinology, working with hormones, which used to I used to work with menopausal women. I didn't, but that's what I like to all say. I used to, and all of a sudden now, I can apply my knowledge and the medication that's been developed for my field in a new way that sort of turns me into God in a way. I can make boys into girls and girls into boys.
Yeah.
And I think you get so invested in what you're doing. And I think there's a point of no return as well, because if you decide this was bad, I shouldn't have done this. That's like an enormous realization, which would render anybody, completely horrified of what you've gone through, what you've done to people.
We did Jesper did a webinar series on past medical scandals, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I think doctors do often have a little bit of a tendency towards a godlike complex. You know what I mean? In fairness, it can be put to good reason. You know what I mean? They're trying to do no harm and they're trying to be very healthy and help people. I get it, but there is something within them, and as well as that, people in my own profession, mental health professionals, there can be an enjoyment of kind of feeling, it's a kind of an over the top kind of desire for power over people that I think isn't quite acknowledged enough among my profession. And so they enjoy the heady, extraordinary feeling of this. But not only that it's very, when you work as a mental health professional, you're so often meeting somebody and you don't really have a magic wand for them. You know, it's hard, they're very depressed, they're anxious, there's no big result, there's no big, and I remember when I gave a webinar to these college counsellors, and one of them put her hand up and she said, you know, when kids come into me with depression, there's nothing I can do. When they come into me with anxiety, there's nothing I can do. But when they came in with gender, I had something I could give them. Are you taking that away, Stella? And I was like, yeah, I am. Because there is no easy solution, but there is something very, very attractive for a mental health professional who's working in the kind of complicated nature of life, that this works. And that's what they were being sold. This works for these kids. Let them have their medical transition. It's going to transform their life. And it's extraordinarily, enthrallingly kind of exciting to go on that journey with somebody. And so I do think that they fell into it out of excitement. I know myself, every single time when I was a novice therapist, every time I went to a workshop, I'd go on, for OCD or for panic or whatever. Within a few weeks, you're just excited about your new skills. You can't help, my poor clients, but you can't help slightly emphasizing OCD or panic.
I heard a debate on the interweb some time ago.
Just want me to give you.
Sorry, I can come closer. Thank you. I heard a debate or a discussion on the internet some time ago where they said that a lot of doctors, endocrinologists especially, were blindsided because you have the whole medical hierarchy when people come to their local practicing doctor. So when they're moved through the system, the endocrinologists think that all these things have been checked. So they're kind of blindsided when they get like a patient that says, well, from the doctor that says, okay, this patient is this, and it's done work. Okay, I'm just going to prescribe this. So do you think that is also a huge part of it, or how big a part of it?
It's a key point. Teachers think it, endocrinologists think it, surgeon thinks it. There's a trust in society that has been misplaced in this context, that the appropriate checks and balances have happened, that there has been a rigorous kind of complex procedure gone through until finally the patient is in front of the endocrinologist. That's not true. Around about 2012, 2013, it was just before the big spike, a new concept came into therapy specifically for gender. It's called gender affirming care. It came in. It has no evidence base, it has no supporting evidence, and what it is that it's from queer theory, really.
Danish, that's kønsbekræftende behandling is what it is in Danish.
It's transformative. And what it is that if somebody comes in, you affirm them. Now, it comes arguably from, if somebody gay comes in, you'd affirm them. I wouldn't go arguing with somebody, oh, well, do you think you're gay? You know what I mean? But at the same time, if somebody was gay, there's no medical intervention coming down the road. There's no actual physical, I don't have to do anything. I don't need to participate in the person being gay or lesbian or bisexual. All I do is promote self-acceptance. Well, if somebody come in with gender issues, arguably promoting self-acceptance has been kind of reframed now as some sort of destructive practice. So affirming therapy got applied to trans-identified young people. And so no matter what age, and that's the phrase they have in the standards of care, that you affirm them. So if they're 4 and they believe it's a little girl who believes she's a boy, you affirm it, no matter what age. And no matter whether they have 45 different diagnoses, such as psychosis, and I've met people in psychosis who have been affirmed. You just affirm, you don't question, and you affirm. So that revolution in the mental health industry happened. Then came the spike with the social media. So it does feel very curated when you start examining it. And then at the same time, there's a social media contagion. And by the time they get to the endocrinologist, the surgeon, whoever, they're back in the old days, presuming that these people are in a very well-established, standardized system. And so that the appropriate checks and balances have happened, but they haven't. They've been gone through an affirming care.
Hi, so I just think the social justice element is really interesting, especially in my generation. I go to college in Dublin, and we have a big sign when you go in the front gate where it says trans healthcare. Irish trans healthcare is the worst in the EU or something like that. So it's sort of something that's kind of constantly there, and the flags are there at my university and stuff. And I just wonder how much of it is about courage, because someone like me doesn't really tend to speak up much in my college about this issue, even though I'm very argumentative. So I just wonder if there's similar things with doctors, where because this is such a kind of social justice rights issue, it becomes something that's really difficult to talk about. And if you're a doctor and you can just pass it on to someone else who's an expert, that leaves you without the headache of being accused of various things.
Talk to Dr. Leslie.
We spoke to a Danish doctor last night And he said the very same, that like when he has written, and Jesper will explain, but when he had written a few articles, people agree with them, and this has happened to me many times over. They go up silently saying, I really agree with you, but I don't want to say anything. And so there is a fear of being branded as something like a bigot or something like that for just wanting to question the issue. So there's a fear, but there's also a hierarchy within medical fields that you don't tend to question other doctors. It would be considered very kind of aggressive to do it. But within the education system, the teachers, they are afraid to question it. Again, to me, there's fear, but there's also men who just think, I don't want to think about this. This is just freaking me out. So yes, whatever you want, fine, is what they say.
Well, that's definitely what our medical advisor says. That is what happens. It's an extraordinary thing is that you find a 4-year-old who for some inexplicable reason likes to wear a dress and doesn't like his penis and thinks he'd rather be a girl. This is obviously could be, in most cases, is a phase that a lot of them go through. What's changed between way back then and now, of course, is that now there is an expectation that you sort of act on it and that you conclude that this must be something that will need some kind of intervention. And there was, I think we spoke about this last night, is that there's a documentary that aired on Danish television, was BBC, DRTV. Was called Et helt menneske, it's just like a whole human or a completely human, and in which is like completely trans positive, trans ideology. There's not a word of criticism being directed against any of the thoughts behind the treatment. There's a kid, boy of 4 or 5, who does a social transition in his kindergarten and into a girl, so he goes from Esbjørn to Esther, which is a girl's name. And basically, I found the whole thing like deeply unsettling, because by the time that boy, now girl, reaches onto puberty and is ripe for puberty blockers, this kid will have no recollections at all of having lived as the gender that he is, or the sex that he is, which is a boy. So there is this effect of, like, I learned a new word this year, which is iatrogenic, which is when the treatment becomes part of the ailment. So that the treatment that these kids are given actually precipitates or provokes an outcome that mightn't have been if we just sort of let them go on with it and let them go through whatever phases they go through.
Yeah, sometimes the treatment creates further problems and creates an obstacle to the person getting better. And puberty blockers, I would say, is very iatrogenic, that it does prevent. It actually, it's bringing on medical transition, because 98% of children whose puberty is blocked go on to cross-sex hormones.
Which is interesting because it was pitched as a sort of a pause where you can think, do I want to go through my puberty or do I actually want to transition? But what's happened, like you say, 98% is what?
98% go on to medical transition, and this is across the range.
So the wait is rather, I can't wait until I get to do this thing.
Yeah.
And do the cross-sex.
It's medicalizing your body when you stop puberty. It's medicalizing your body, and that's what they've done. But like you said, there's a psychological thing happens when a 4-year-old is told he's a girl and that his penis will be changing when he's older, and that we're going to stop puberty and we're going to call you she, her, and you go into the girls' toilets. 4-year-olds, it's a complexity that is so beyond them that, like, it's extraordinary. People tend, when I talk about this, they tend to think that this isn't really happening. And it is happening, and it's happening in numbers, and it's new. So it's only in the last 10 years. I know there's 2 questions.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Is that okay?
Is he okay?
Okay. Oh my God.
Counterbalance.
Oh my God. Where was I?
It better be a good question.
Like everybody likes a bit of physical comedy.
That was really
That was
that was for affirmation.
It's good stuff.
From up to down.
No, I was thinking about the aspect of, because I was brought up in the belief that you can be whoever you want to be. I mean, if you are a tomboy, a tomgirl, or whatever, I mean, it doesn't really change anything. You can be as you want to be in the body that you have. And I see in this trend with the trans ideology and such, that you have to be binary. Either you are a boy trapped in a woman's body, you're a boy, or vice versa. You have to be. It's very polarizing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's seeking labels. You know, we contain multitudes, and you know, some of us are quite boyish, quite girlish, and quite poetic and quite practical. And this new world we're in is seeking to label and categorize everybody to an extreme. So as soon as you're either, and they've got into, you know, the 72 genders would be an example. It's not enough to just say I'm a girl, or I'm a trans boy, or I'm a trans girl. It's I'm a demi boy, or I've worked with girls who are, and this is complicated, so they would be, let's say, feminine presenting, but they say they're a boy, but they're femme boy. So these are basically standard girlish girls.
Fancy title.
And with a fancy title, so they're femme boys. And it's like, okay, and that would be fine. If this was just be who you want to be, but on your labels, because frankly, it's a world that's obsessed with labels these days. If that's what you want to be, I wouldn't be sitting here if there wasn't the issue of medical transition, if there wasn't the issue of detransition, if there wasn't people who were devastated by lives about their sexual, their sexual impairment and their sexual dysfunction and their infertility. So, you know, in a way we lost a massive opportunity, because it could have been fun for these kids running around being boys and girls and demi boys and femme boys. They could have actually enjoyed it. We saw a bit of it. We saw a flutter of it in the 70s and 80s with David Bowie and Boy George, and it was actually quite fun by the looks of it. And it's like we had an opportunity that we badly lost, because we turned it into a grim, diagnosis-obsessed, medical-obsessed kind of hardship that is very far away from somebody enjoying their kind of identities. Did you want to ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
And I know this lady.
I heard in the radio that there's transgender stop hormones are the same as those used by people who are premature puberty, and we have a problem in most of the world, because we are getting into puberty at a younger and younger age when people are not actually ready for it.
So are you saying that the early puberty is causing an issue with these kids, or premature babies?
It's premature puberty.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a huge issue, especially, don't forget, these kids are autistic. A huge amount of them are autistic. So imagine if you're autistic, and these days, like the age of puberty has gone down significantly in the last
Yeah, I
couple of
think
years.
that's your point, isn't it? That the usage of the drugs has been to hold
Puberty,
onset.
puberty.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, well, my point is, I think you said that they are used to treat transgender, or what we would call it, and that's a bad thing. But the drugs, I think, is a good thing, because they treat the people who are premature.
Yeah,
Label.
precocious puberty. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so these drugs were created in 1980. They were developed for a very specific condition, which is called precocious puberty. And that is that there's some very, very, very unusual condition, and maybe children at 6 or 7 might go into puberty. They're not emotionally mature enough. The puberty gets stopped, and then when they're 9 or 10, they stop taking the puberty blockers and they go into normal puberty. That's what the drugs were created for. And that was in 1980. And it was just one of many drugs that was created. And it had a need. I've met a person who had precocious puberty. And she said, I was getting breasts at 5, like it was not appropriate. And it's definitely good to stop that. So I have no issue with that. But there is another issue I just want to add, like,
The usage, so there's a less auspicious usage of these drugs.
yeah, then they started using those drugs for people who are trans-identified. What happened was, it was in a Dutch clinic in the late 80s, and a girl had a phobia around her periods, and a clinician who was probably working with those children said, why don't we stop her puberty with this puberty blocker? And that was the first one who did it. And then the Dutch clinicians, the same clinicians, they noticed that the rates of happiness among the the people who transitioned, the adults, weren't good, because they kept saying they weren't passing very well. So they said, what if we, rather than saying maybe this isn't a great intervention.
That's how much they actually look like the
Yeah,
sex they purport to be.
passing means that they weren't fooling people as such, that they were, you know, the opposite sex. And so it was considered a very difficult life. And rather than realizing perhaps this is an intervention that isn't working, they thought, why don't we transition them as children? Why don't we stop their puberty so that they don't have to fight against their masculine voices and their big shoulders? Why don't we stop it much earlier? Which was really, really radical, insane idea, I would say, the day they had that idea. And they had a study, and they took 70 kids, and they gave them all puberty blockers. It was a very definite system. They gave puberty blockers at the beginning of puberty. Then when they were about 16, they gave them some of them 18, cross-sex hormones. And then they went on to genital surgery when they were about 19 or 20. And of those 70, 15 dropped out of the study. So there was 55 left. They dropped out for reasons such as obesity and heart complications. So already there was physical issues. One of them died. One of them was a boy who had an operation, a genital operation, and he died a couple of days later as a direct result of the intervention. And
what were they trying to do with his genitals?
So they were, when you had your puberty blocked, your penis doesn't grow. And so he had a little boy's penis. So when he was, let's say, 19 or 20, and they were trying to invert the penis to turn it into a vagina, they didn't have enough tissue to work with. I know this is very difficult to listen to. And so they, there's a ruffle among the audience. And then
I've seen the pictures.
And they didn't have enough tissue to work with, so they used other tissue, other material. There was complications. It was too elaborate and ambitious a surgery, and the boy died. But usually, like if you look at any other medical study, 1 kid out of 70 died, 15 dropped out. It was a disaster. It was an utter disaster.
And there was no control group either.
No control group, but it was billed as a great success. Unbelievably, when you read up, and this is all very easily found, you'll find the Dutch study very easily online. It's all well established, and we don't know how they're doing now. The Dutch clinicians keep on saying, "Yeah, we will do a follow-up soon. We'll do a follow-up soon." So we don't know. The last time we heard of them properly was 2014. There was a couple of murmurs in a conference about 2021, 22, saying, "Yeah, we have the results on the way." We don't know how these kids have got on, but we do know that there's one study of one long-term child who's had it, and that person has never managed to had one long-term relationship, has never managed to reconcile their genitals. They hate their genitals. They're filled with body shame, but they don't regret their medical transition. And that doesn't surprise me, because when you've had such radical interventions, our ability to regret 40 years of our life is quite limited.
The gambler's fallacy.
Yeah, you're bought in. You're bought in. But anyway, the person has had a lonely life, hates their genitals, body shame, and that's the only long term for these children who've been. So we will in a few years we're going to have loads of long-term studies, but not yet.
What the experience I find from the ones I've talked to is that the whole community has a new set of friends that they acquire in transitioning. People patting them on the back and saying, "You're awesome, it's fantastic that you're doing this, and finally you can be you, and I love you, and you're fantastic." And when they regret and detransition, they lose this entire cohort of friends. Is that they're all of them not interesting anymore.
Yeah.
Or the friends feel uneasy around them because, of course, they also we're egging them on in a sense to do it. So these kids are left alone on the platform with disfigured bodies and with having made like disastrous choices that basically will disable them from, doing the things in life that typically would denote a happy grown-up life.
So many, you know, I give these detransition support groups, and I know you have a question, and I know this guy has a question, but I give these detransition support groups each week, and so many of them live what they call stealth. So they have detransitioned, they've stopped taking their hormones, but they're not telling anybody because they don't want to be ousted from their community, and they would be ousted from their community. So they're kind of secret detransitions, and it's just, you know, I know how to keep up with the kind of, you know what I mean? But they don't feel they can say it was all a mistake, because there's this kind of theory that is kind of really kind of taken off, which is this idea that you can be born in the wrong body. And when you think about that, it doesn't hold water for even a second, because we're born in our bodies and as our bodies, and when my body dies, I die. And so this idea that there was a menu of bodies to choose from and I picked the wrong body, it never had, it was a great description of a feeling, but it never had any kind of material, you know, reality. But it's kind of gone into the water as an understanding of what's gone on. And when people don't understand it, they kind of tend to think it's kind of like being gay, that they've been born in the wrong body and they have to transition. And generally people don't want to think about it very much, and they move on very quickly then, you know. Do you want to give your question? And there's two more questions going.
You have answered it a little bit, but still, we don't know how many who've actually detransitioned, but we know that there are some who haven't, who are still transitioning. And do you think that for some it actually do make sense to be medicalized? Or maybe I'm asking, are there actually some who are trans people, whatever that is? I don't know.
Yeah, whatever that is a big question. I would never really presume to know that why, you know, should some people go and live in Alaska and why they're happy. They are happy and they do. You know what I mean? So some people take decisions that I mightn't be able to understand, but they say they're happy and I take them at their word that they're happy. There's no doubt that some people who medically transition say that they're very happy and it's the best thing that they ever did. It is a hard road. It is, you know, it has an awful lot of medical complications, but that doesn't mean that there's something within them that's some sort of essence of trans. It means they made an adaptation to their body and they're happy with it. You know what I mean? It means that they have. So imagine if little me who wanted to be a boy, and if I'd become a boy and I was living a successful life, and I was saying, yeah, I still actually think I'd be good as a boy. And I can imagine how I'd say, yeah, I'm glad. But there'd be a kind of front in me that would say, yeah, I'm glad, I'm happy. You know the way sometimes, for example, marriage, so many people say, you know, I'm happily married or whatever, and you're like, really? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I've no doubt that very many people say medical transition was the best decision I've ever made. And who am I to question it? I don't question it. I do think that lots of people make lots of decisions, and whether they regret it or not might not be the most important question. It's what should be the best intervention for people who are gender non-conforming. That should be the real question, as opposed to, well, some people don't regret it and some people regret it. I don't know, that's not the way we approach.
Should kids do it?
No, absolutely not. I don't think it's appropriate at all for children to do it. But I don't think it's the right framing of a question that there trans within them. They've adapted their body and they're living as trans people happily. They're probably entitled to it. Do you have a question, and yourself?
Yes. We round up and we'll talk about
what we've seen in Denmark over the past year is that the gender clinic has become considerably more cautious. There are not so many children being put on puberty blockers as there were 5 years ago. But the health authority still refuses to actually ban these medications for under 16s. So there's still going to be some kids that are going to be put on this stuff. And I was thinking, you know, that because of the CAS report, because of the WPATH files, we seem to be now in a situation, and I don't know if this is just my wishful thinking, but we seem to be in a situation where the era of no debate is past. Is that your,
Is that
take
my
on it,
thought? Yeah.
or are we still fighting against this?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Jesper tells me we should wrap up with that question. I think the era of no debate has passed. I think, for example, GenSpec, we have a conference wherever WPATH have a conference. So if we follow them if they're in Lisbon in September, we're in Lisbon in September. They were in Denver in November, and we follow them around the world. So we insist on having debate because we have a conference right beside them at the same time.
Tell what WPATH.
Yeah, WPATH is the Work Professional Association for Transgender Health, and so they are the kind of HQ of promoting medical transition, and as I say, no matter what age. And so GenSpec has taken it upon themselves to challenge this and challenge the no debate era, and instead say, yeah, we're going to have a conference wherever you have a conference, and we've got a different perspective because we believe that there's no need to medicalize identities, that there's lots of different identities people can have, there's lots of different ways to present yourself, and it's perfectly fine to present yourself anyway. You don't need to medicalize. And I think it's the medicalization of identities is the issue here. Rather than the identities, it's the medicalization of the identities.
Can I ask you just, when will it end? How will it end?
Yes.
Yep. All right.
We have one last question. You want to take that?
Yeah, and then we'll wrap up with my two questions.
So how would you answer your own question of, so what is the fruitful approach to a 4-year-old and her parents coming and saying,
yeah,
you got me. I mean, you got me on your side with all those terrible things you've said. But so what's the way forward?
Yeah. So if a little boy is running around wearing a dress, I don't see any need for any sort of intervention. Let them off, let them do whatever they want. And if a little girl is running around playing with trucks, off she goes. I don't see any need for any intervention. The only real reason to have an intervention is some sort of declaration of hating themselves or hating their body. And if they hate there's lots of people who hate their body and hate themselves. And generally it's coming from some sort of mental distress. For myself, it definitely, I was an unhappy family. You know what I mean? So I can see why I hated myself and I rejected myself. So what we would be trying to do is basically helping them come around to the fact that they have a body and that your body can do lots of things. It can climb trees, it can swim, it can, dance, it can yoga. A kind of body acceptance ultimately is what you're trying to help a kid. At 4 and 5, usually there's very little you need to do except kind of a softening approach towards their body. You know what I mean? Trying to soften them. When they're older and if they're in deep, because people manifest distress in the most extraordinary ways. Like, by the way, anorexia came, never been seen before, it arrived into the water, it never left. Bulimia came, it had never been seen before, arrived in, it left. It stayed. Self-harming came into the kind of world, never been seen before. It's a new way to hate yourself, and it has stayed. And so now gender dysphoria has now come. Do you follow me? So our human ability to reject ourselves is kind of, it's unlimited. So it's just another way for a body to reject yourself. And you're just trying to bring around body acceptance. And there's loads of different ways psychotherapists would do it. But a general softening of yourself, softening of your approach, a kindness toward yourself, maybe some exploration of what your body can do in a nice way. You know what I mean? Trying to make friends with yourself is what you're trying to do. But your question?
Well, my question would be, when will this end? Oh, will this end?
Yeah.
When will it end? How will it end? In your view?
I believe it is ending. I think people are starting to inform themselves around this. I think most people have quite a lot of people have woken up to the idea of child sex change and think this is horrifying, and I think they're right. So I think children, it's going to close down quite soon. I think in England they've already banned puberty blockers. I know in Denmark they have banned them. Irritatingly, they're banning them only but letting the kind of my group through. The kids who are gender non-conforming as young children, they're the ones that are going to be getting puberty blockers, which is horrifying because they're the ones most likely to grow up gay, bisexual or lesbian. So that is actually, effectively sterilizing a whole group, a whole generation of gay, lesbian and bisexual children. So it's a very, very heavy intervention that's happening with those young children. But I think in the future we're going to move, and we've already seen it, we're going to move into different identities. I don't know what those identities will be. I think there will be a medicalization of future identities. You know, we already see it with all the kind of emphasis on diagnosis on their Twitter profiles and on their TikTok profiles. So I think it's going to kind of move as opposed to, you know, gender will become a bit old hat.
So it'll be some new horror.
Some new horror.
Why? My last question will be: why is this the most important fight to win in our culture today?
I think the thing about gender, I really do encourage people to involve themselves, because it has everything. It's the question of what it is that makes you a man or makes you a woman. You know, it goes down to the very heart of it. Are you just a bunch? Is it just your body? Is it your hormones? Is it you? Is there some sort of essence inside you? So it is very compelling. But this fight, it contains censorship. It contains, you know, a lack of truth. It contains this kind of new kind of way of thinking where identity, you know, supersedes everything. It has created some sort of mass of mob control that is very, very frightening, and it's a threat on society in the wider sense because of the era of no debate, because of censorship, because of inaccurate kind of information that was dispersed so heavily and in such a kind of an insidious manner, that it's imperative people see it in the wider sense, that it's a real threat on, you know, a good, civilized, honest society.
Thank you so much, Stella. God bless, and very best of luck with your fight. I'm glad to say that I'll be joining you in Lisbon this autumn, and thanks for the invitation. And you know, can't wait to see what goes on down there. So thanks so much for coming and for all the work you do.
Thank you very much.
I'm in London. I'm going over to work for the Academy Review. We're doing our summer, like we're doing a summer show in the middle of July. Yeah, it is fun. I'm fun. So really, yeah. She's young though. She's only 16. Maybe 2 years. It goes on. It's been going on for 8 years. Yeah, no, it is. It's very fun to plan. So what do you have to do now?
I've been on for it.